Hello, everyone. Today we're going to embark on what might be the most important philosophical journey of your life. We're going to explore something that could fundamentally transform how you see your goals, relationships, achievements, failures, and your entire approach to happiness and fulfillment. We're going to dive deep into why your desires, the very things you believe will make you happy, are actually the primary source of your suffering. And I'm not talking about obviously destructive desires like revenge, addiction, or malice. I'm talking about your most innocent, reasonable, socially acceptable, and culturally encouraged desires. Your desire for love, success, recognition, security, health, beauty, wealth, meaning, purpose, respect, achievement, and a better life. What if I told you that the very moment you desire something, you've already guaranteed your own unhappiness? What if the act of wanting itself is what creates the unbridgeable gap between you and contentment? What if every time you think, I'll be happy when I get this job, I'll be complete when I find the right person, I'll be satisfied when I achieve this goal, you're actually moving further away from happiness rather than closer to it? This isn't mystical nonsense, religious dogma about renouncing the world, or some depressing philosophy of giving up on life. This is a precise, logical, psychologically sophisticated analysis that the ancient Stoics developed over 2,000 years ago, and it's more relevant today than it has ever been. In our age of infinite choices, constant comparison through social media, consumer capitalism, and the relentless pursuit of optimization, understanding the relationship between desire and suffering has become not just philosophically interesting, but practically essential for mental health. We live in what we might call the most desire-stimulated culture in human history. Every day, you're bombarded with thousands of messages designed to make you want things. Advertisements don't just sell products. They sell feelings, identities, lifestyles, solutions to problems you didn't know you had. Social media platforms are essentially desire generation machines, constantly showing you what other people have that you don't, where other people are going that you're not, what other people are achieving that you haven't. Our entire economic system depends on your dissatisfaction with what you currently have. If everyone were content with their current possessions, relationships, achievements, and circumstances, the economy would collapse overnight. Consumer capitalism requires perpetual wanting, constant upgrading, endless growth, and the belief that happiness is always just one more purchase, one more achievement, one more experience away. But what if this entire framework is not just wrong, but actively harmful to human flourishing? What if the pursuit of desire is exactly what keeps us trapped in cycles of frustration, disappointment, anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness? What if the very structure of wanting is inherently problematic, regardless of what we're wanting or whether we eventually get it? Let me start with something you've undoubtedly experienced countless times throughout your life, probably without fully recognizing the pattern. Think about the last time you really wanted something significant. Maybe it was a job you were interviewing for, spending weeks or months preparing, researching the company, imagining how your life would change if you got it. Maybe it was a relationship you were hoping would develop, someone you met who seemed perfect, and you found yourself constantly thinking about them, analyzing every interaction, planning what you might do together. Maybe it was a major purchase you were saving for, a car or house or vacation, and you spent months researching options, visiting showrooms or websites, imagining how much better your life would be once you owned this thing. Maybe it was a goal you were working toward, a fitness target, a creative project, a business venture, and you organized your entire schedule around achieving this objective. Really remember that feeling of wanting it intensely, that sense of incompleteness that seemed to follow you everywhere, that nagging awareness that something important was missing from your life, that restless energy that came from constantly thinking about something you didn't yet have. Remember how your mind would drift to this desired object throughout the day, how you'd find yourself daydreaming about having it, how conversations with friends would somehow circle back to this thing you wanted. Now remember what happened when you finally got it. If you did get it, there was probably a moment of satisfaction, maybe even euphoria. You felt vindicated, accomplished, complete. You thought, finally, I have what I wanted. Now I can be happy. But here's the crucial question. How long did that feeling last? A day? A week? A month? And then what happened? I'm willing to bet that one of several predictable things occurred. Either you started taking it for granted, treating it as the new normal rather than as the special achievement it once seemed to be. Or you started wanting something else, something bigger, better, different, more advanced. Or you started worrying about losing what you had gained, about whether you deserved it, about whether it was really as good as you had hoped it would be. Or you discovered that getting what you wanted came with its own set of problems, responsibilities, and complications that you hadn't anticipated. This is not a personal failing on your part. This is not because you're ungrateful, greedy, or chose the wrong thing to want. This is not because you have unrealistic expectations or because you're somehow broken as a person. This is the fundamental structure of desire itself, and the Stoics understood this structure with remarkable clarity, depth, and practical wisdom that has stood the test of over 2 millennia. When we talk about desire in the Stoic sense, we need to be extremely precise about what we mean, because there are many different types of wanting, and not all of them are problematic. We're not talking about basic biological needs like hunger, thirst, the need for sleep, or the need for physical safety, though even these can become sources of suffering when we relate to them in problematic ways. We're not talking about simple preferences like preferring chocolate ice cream to vanilla, sunny weather to rainy weather, or comfortable furniture to uncomfortable furniture. We're talking about what the Stoics called passion, what we might call emotional attachment to outcomes that don't entirely depend on us. The key phrase here is that don't entirely depend on us. The Stoics made what is perhaps the most fundamental distinction in all of philosophy. The distinction between what depends on us and what doesn't depend on us. What depends entirely on us are our judgments about events, our responses to circumstances, our efforts toward goals, our character development, our values, our choices about how to interpret situations, our decisions about how to treat other people, our commitment to living according to our principles. These things are completely within your control, assuming you're willing to take full responsibility for them. What depends partially on us are things like our health, our relationships, our career success, our financial situation, our reputation, our creative output. You can influence these things significantly through your choices and efforts, but you can't control them completely because they also depend on factors outside your control. Other people's decisions, economic conditions, natural events, genetic factors, timing, luck, and countless variables that are beyond your influence. What doesn't depend on us at all are things like the weather, other people's thoughts and feelings about you, political events, natural disasters, historical developments, and the vast majority of events happening in the world at any given moment. You have zero control over these things, regardless of how much you might want to influence them. The problem with desire, in the problematic sense that creates suffering, is that it almost always focuses on things in the second or third categories, things you can't fully control. If you desire a promotion at work, your emotional well-being becomes dependent on your boss's decision, company politics, economic conditions, budget constraints, organizational restructuring, and countless factors completely outside your control. You might do excellent work for years and still not get promoted due to circumstances that have nothing to do with your performance. You might do mediocre work and get promoted anyway due to favoritism, timing, or pure luck. Making your happiness conditional on getting the promotion is making your happiness conditional on things you don't control. This external dependence is a form of voluntary slavery that most people never recognize they've entered into. You've made yourself a slave to circumstances, to other people's decisions, to the whims of fate, to forces that don't care about your happiness and that you can't influence through your character, efforts, or good intentions. The Stoics valued freedom above almost everything else, and they saw desire-based attachment as the primary obstacle to freedom. When you need something external to be happy, you're not free. You're dependent. You're at the mercy of forces beyond your control. You've given away your power to determine your own emotional state to people and circumstances that may not have your best interests at heart. This external dependence also corrupts your relationships with others, often in ways you don't recognize. When you need something from someone, you can't relate to them genuinely because you're always calculating how to get them to give you what you want. You become strategic rather than honest, manipulative rather than authentic, needy rather than generous, controlling rather than accepting. If you need your romantic partner to love you in a particular way for you to be happy, you'll try to control their feelings and behavior through various forms of subtle or not-so-subtle manipulation. If you need your boss to promote you for you to feel successful, you'll start playing political games at work rather than focusing on doing excellent work. If you need your friends to approve of your choices for you to feel confident, you'll start hiding parts of yourself that might be criticized, becoming a performer rather than a genuine person. This neediness and manipulation, even when it's unconscious, pushes people away and creates exactly the rejection and abandonment you were trying to avoid. People can sense when they're being related to as a means to an end rather than as valuable in themselves, and they naturally resist being used for someone else's emotional regulation, even when the other person isn't consciously trying to use them. But let's go much deeper into the specific mechanisms by which desire creates suffering, because understanding these patterns is crucial for developing the ability to recognize them in your own life and work with them skillfully. The first mechanism is what we might call the problem of ontological incompleteness. When you desire something, you're not just saying, "I would prefer to have this thing." You're making a much deeper philosophical claim. You're saying that reality as it currently exists is insufficient, that you as you currently are inadequate, that your life as it currently is lacks something essential for your well-being. Desire is always based on the perception of lack, absence, or deficiency. You cannot desire something you already have in the way you want to have it. Desire emerges from the recognition that something is missing from your experience, something that you believe would improve, complete, or fulfill your life if you possessed it. But here's what most people don't recognize. The moment you desire something, you're defining yourself as fundamentally incomplete. You're telling yourself that your current state is insufficient, inadequate, lacking in some essential way. You're saying that you need something external to you, something you don't currently possess, in order to be whole, happy, fulfilled, or complete as a person. This might seem obvious and unproblematic at first glance, but think carefully about what this actually means for your moment-to-moment experience of being alive. If your happiness depends on getting something you don't have, then in this moment right now you are unhappy. You're in a state of wanting, which is a state of lack, which is a state of dissatisfaction, which is a state of suffering. Even if you eventually get what you want, you've spent all the time between wanting and getting in a state of emotional incompleteness and psychological dissatisfaction. But the situation is actually much worse than this, because even when you do get what you want, several predictable psychological phenomena occur that prevent the satisfaction from being as complete or as lasting as you expected when you were in the state of wanting. The first phenomenon is what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill. This is the well-documented tendency for human beings to return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite positive or negative events. The satisfaction you get from achieving your desire is temporary. Your emotional baseline returns to roughly where it was before you got what you wanted, but now you need bigger and better things to get the same emotional high. This is why people who get rich keep wanting to get richer, why people who become famous want more fame, why people who achieve one level of success immediately start aiming for the next level, why people in relationships start wanting different or better relationships, why people who lose weight want to lose more weight, why people who get recognition want more recognition. The hedonic treadmill means that external achievements provide diminishing returns in terms of actual satisfaction. The first $1 million feels more significant than the second million. The first promotion feels more meaningful than the fifth promotion. The first romantic relationship feels more transformative than subsequent relationships. You need more and more external stimulation to produce the same internal satisfaction, like a drug addict who needs increasingly larger doses to get high. The second phenomenon is what we might call hedonic reversal. The moment you get what you wanted, it stops being an object of desire and becomes an object of possession. And possession brings its own distinct forms of suffering that are often just as problematic as the original wanting, sometimes even worse. Now you have to worry about losing what you've gained. Now you have to maintain it, protect it, optimize it, show it off, justify having it, or defend it against others who might want to take it away. The thing that was supposed to solve your problems has created new problems. The achievement that was supposed to end your suffering has become a new source of anxiety, responsibility, and mental preoccupation. Think about buying a car, since this is an experience most people can relate to directly. When you want the car, you suffer from not having it. You look at other people's cars with envy. You fantasize about how much better your life will be when you have reliable transportation or a more attractive vehicle or whatever specific benefit you expect the car to provide. You research options obsessively, visit dealerships, read reviews, compare prices, negotiate deals, all while in a state of wanting that car. When you finally get the car, you might have a brief moment of satisfaction, that new car feeling, the pleasure of finally having what you wanted, the sense of accomplishment and progress. But then, often within days or weeks, you start experiencing forms of suffering directly related to owning the car that you never experienced when you were just wanting it. You start worrying about scratches, dents, and damage. You stress about car payments, insurance costs, maintenance expenses, and repair bills. You become anxious about where to park it, whether it's safe, whether someone might steal it or break into it. You second-guess your choice, wondering if you should have bought a different model, color, or brand. You start noticing other cars that are newer, nicer, or more impressive than yours. The car, which was supposed to end your transportation-related suffering, has become a new source of financial pressure, maintenance anxiety, and mental preoccupation. You went from suffering because you didn't have a car to suffering because you do have a car. The content of your worry changed, but the underlying structure of suffering remained exactly the same. This pattern repeats across every area of human desire with remarkable consistency. The promotion you wanted brings new pressures, responsibilities, and expectations that create different forms of stress. The house you wanted brings mortgage payments, maintenance headaches, property taxes, and the anxiety of homeownership. The recognition you wanted brings new scrutiny, higher expectations, and the pressure to maintain your reputation. The financial security you wanted brings new worries about market volatility, investment decisions, and economic uncertainty. The relationship you wanted brings concerns about compatibility, commitment, future planning, and the fear of loss. The children you wanted bring sleepless nights, financial pressure, constant worry about their safety and development, and the loss of personal freedom. The perfect body you wanted brings the pressure to maintain it, the fear of aging, and new forms of self-consciousness. This isn't to say that cars, jobs, houses, relationships, or any of these things are inherently bad or that you shouldn't pursue them. The Stoics weren't ascetics who rejected all material goods, human connections, or worldly engagement. The problem isn't with the things themselves. The problem is with the relationship of desire we develop toward these things. The problem is making our happiness conditional on getting and keeping them. The third phenomenon is what we might call the problem of comparative multiplication. Desire naturally leads to comparison, and comparison is one of the most reliable generators of human misery. When you want something, you inevitably start comparing your situation to the situations of people who have what you want. And this comparison almost always makes you feel worse about your own circumstances. If you desire wealth, you start noticing and resenting people who are wealthier than you. If you desire romantic love, you start feeling envious of couples who seem happier than you. If you desire professional recognition, you start feeling bitter toward people who are more successful in your field. If you desire physical attractiveness, you start feeling inadequate when you see people who are more conventionally beautiful than you. But comparison is a losing game, because there's always someone who has more of what you want, someone who seems to have achieved it more easily, someone who has what you want plus other things you didn't even know you wanted until you saw them. No matter how much you achieve or acquire, there will always be people who have achieved or acquired more, faster, with less effort, or with better results. Social media has made this comparative suffering exponentially worse because you're now comparing yourself not just to people in your immediate environment, whose circumstances you understand reasonably well, but to carefully curated highlight reels of millions of people around the world whose daily struggles and insecurities are completely invisible to you. You see vacation photos, career announcements, relationship milestones, lifestyle displays, achievement celebrations, and success stories from people whose failures, setbacks, mundane moments, and private difficulties are never posted. You're comparing your internal experience, which includes all your doubts, fears, failures, insecurities, and ordinary moments, to other people's external presentations, which are carefully edited to show only the most impressive and attractive aspects of their lives. You're comparing reality to performance, and reality will always seem inadequate by comparison. You're making yourself miserable over gaps between your life and other people's lives that don't actually exist in the way you imagine them. The people you're envying are probably engaging in the same comparison process, looking at other people and feeling inadequate for similar reasons. This comparison-driven suffering is particularly toxic because it's based on illusions and distortions. You're creating emotional pain for yourself based on false information, incomplete pictures, and unrealistic standards that no one actually meets consistently in their daily lived experience. The fourth phenomenon is what we might call temporal displacement anxiety. Desire always displaces your well-being into the future. It tells you that you'll be happy when you get what you want, which means you can't be happy now. You're constantly living in anticipation of some future state that will finally make you feel complete, fulfilled, or satisfied. But the future never actually arrives in the way you imagine it will. When you get what you wanted, that moment immediately becomes the present. And if you're in the habit of displacing happiness into the future, you'll immediately start wanting something else. You'll say, "Okay, I got that thing I wanted, but now I need this other thing to really be happy." This creates a chronic inability to be present, to appreciate what you have right now, to find satisfaction in your current circumstances. You're always living in anticipation of some future state rather than engaging fully with your actual life as it's happening moment by moment. Think about how this plays out in career development, which is one of the most common areas where people experience this temporal displacement. People often think, "I'll be happy when I graduate from college." Then they graduate and think, "I'll be happy when I get my first real job." Then they get a job and think, "I'll be happy when I get promoted." Then they get promoted and think, "I'll be happy when I reach management level." Then they reach management and think, "I'll be happy when I become an executive." Then they become an executive and think, "I'll be happy when I retire with enough money to be comfortable." At each stage, they're missing the opportunity to appreciate and enjoy where they actually are because they're focused on where they think they need to be next. They spend their entire career anticipating some future state of satisfaction that never arrives because it's always being pushed further into the future as soon as the current goal is achieved. The same pattern occurs in relationships. "I'll be happy when I start dating someone." "I'll be happy when we become exclusive." "I'll be happy when we move in together." "I'll be happy when we get engaged." "I'll be happy when we get married." "I'll be happy when we have children." "I'll be happy when the children grow up and become independent." "I'll be happy when we retire and can spend more time together." Each milestone that was supposed to provide lasting satisfaction becomes just another stepping stone to the next source of anticipated happiness. Meanwhile, the actual experience of being in a relationship, with all its daily pleasures, challenges, growth opportunities, and moments of connection, is overlooked because attention is focused on future developments rather than present realities. The fifth phenomenon is what we might call identity fusion and self-worth contamination. When you desire something strongly enough for long enough, you start to identify with the desire. You stop being a person who wants a particular thing and start being someone whose entire identity depends on getting that thing. You go from, "I want to be an actor," to, "I am someone who needs to become an actor to be a complete and worthwhile person." This identity fusion makes the stakes of desire artificially and unnecessarily high. If you don't get what you want, it's not just that you didn't get something you preferred. It's that you failed as a person, that you're inadequate as a human being, that your entire sense of self is threatened, that you don't know who you are anymore if you're not pursuing this particular goal. This is why people often become severely depressed, anxious, or experience identity crises when their major desires aren't fulfilled. They've made their desires so central to their identity that not getting what they want feels like psychological death. They can't imagine who they would be or how they would find meaning and purpose if they gave up on the thing they've been wanting. Consider someone who's wanted to be a doctor since childhood. They've organized their entire sense of self around this goal. They've told everyone they know that they're going to be a doctor. They've made academic and social choices based on this ambition. Their parents are proud of them for having such a noble and practical goal. Their self-esteem is tied to being the person who's going to become a doctor. If they don't get into medical school, or if they get into medical school but discover they hate the work, or if they become a doctor but find the profession unfulfilling, they experience an identity crisis that goes far beyond simple disappointment about not achieving a goal. They don't know who they are if they're not someone who's becoming or being a doctor. They feel like they've wasted years of their life and let down everyone who believed in them. This identity fusion makes it very difficult to change course or adapt when circumstances change because doing so feels like psychological suicide. It also makes it impossible to enjoy the process of pursuing goals because so much of your sense of self-worth is riding on the outcome. You can't be present with the learning, growth, and experiences along the way because you're so focused on whether you'll ultimately succeed. The sixth phenomenon is what we might call the scarcity amplification effect. Desire is based on the assumption that there's not enough of whatever you want to go around, that you need to compete with others to get your share, that other people getting what you want somehow diminishes your own chances of getting it. This scarcity thinking creates a hostile and competitive relationship with other people's success and happiness. When someone else gets a promotion, you feel like that reduces your chances of getting promoted. When someone else finds love, you feel like that makes it less likely that you'll find love. When someone else achieves something you want, you feel resentful rather than inspired or happy for them. Scarcity thinking also makes you possessive and controlling about the things you do have. If you believe there's not enough love to go around, you'll try to monopolize your partner's attention and affection. If you believe there's not enough recognition to go around, you'll feel threatened by colleagues who are also doing good work. If you believe there's not enough money to go around, you'll become stingy and suspicious of others' financial motives. This competitive, zero-sum mindset poisons relationships and creates exactly the isolation, conflict, and mistrust that make life unsatisfying. When you see other people as competitors for scarce resources rather than as potential allies, collaborators, and sources of mutual support, you create a social environment that's hostile and stressful for everyone, including yourself. The truth is that most of what people really want, love, respect, meaning, connection, purpose, inner peace, creative fulfillment, are not actually scarce resources that need to be competed for. There's no limit to how much love can exist in the world. One person being respected doesn't prevent another person from also being respected. Someone else finding meaning in their life doesn't make meaning less available to you. But desire makes these abundant resources seem scarce because it focuses your attention on specific external manifestations rather than on the underlying experiences you're actually seeking. You want love from this particular person rather than appreciating the love that's already available from friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, and even strangers. You want respect in this particular context rather than noticing the respect you already receive in other areas of your life. The seventh phenomenon is what we might call the opportunity cost multiplication effect. The more options you have for potential objects of desire, the more difficult it becomes to make choices, and the more likely you are to feel regret, anxiety, or dissatisfaction about the choices you make or don't make. Modern life provides an overwhelming array of choices in every domain: career paths, lifestyle options, consumer goods, entertainment, romantic partners, places to live, ways to spend time, educational opportunities, travel destinations. This abundance of choice, which seems like it should make people happier and more fulfilled, often makes them more anxious and less satisfied with whatever they choose. When you choose one thing, you're implicitly choosing not to choose all the other available options. This creates what psychologists call the fear of missing out, or FOMO. You're constantly worried that you're missing better opportunities, that other people are making better choices, that you're not optimizing your life correctly, that you could be happier if you had made different decisions. Even when you get what you wanted, you wonder if you could have gotten something better if you had waited longer, researched more thoroughly, or made different choices. The relationship you're in might be good, but you wonder if there might be someone more compatible out there. The career you've chosen might be satisfying, but you wonder if you would have been happier in a different field. The city you live in might be pleasant, but you wonder if you'd be more fulfilled somewhere else. This choice-induced anxiety is exacerbated by desire, because desire makes you feel like making the wrong choice will prevent you from being happy. If your happiness depends on external things, then choosing the wrong external things becomes a matter of enormous importance. You feel pressure to optimize every decision because you believe your emotional well-being depends on making the right choices consistently. Now let's examine how these mechanisms play out in specific areas of modern life, because understanding the general principles is only the beginning. We need to see how desire operates in the particular contexts where we actually live our lives, make our decisions, and experience our suffering. Career ambition and professional achievement represent one of the most socially encouraged and culturally reinforced forms of desire in our society. We're told from childhood that we should be passionate about our work, that we should chase our dreams, that we should never settle for mediocrity, that we should always be striving for the next level of achievement, that work should be fulfilling and meaningful, that career success is a measure of personal worth. This sounds inspiring and motivational, but it often creates enormous suffering for people who take these messages seriously. When you're passionate about career success in the problematic sense, when you're emotionally attached to specific outcomes rather than simply committed to doing excellent work, every setback becomes personal. Every rejection feels like a judgment on your worth as a person. Every person who advances faster than you becomes a source of resentment and self-doubt. Every delay in your progress feels like evidence that you're failing at life or that you don't have what it takes to succeed. I've observed countless people make themselves genuinely miserable pursuing careers they thought would make them happy. They sacrifice their physical health by working excessive hours, believing that success requires such sacrifice. They sacrifice their relationships by prioritizing work over personal connections, thinking they'll have time for relationships once they achieve their career goals. They sacrifice their present enjoyment and mental peace by constantly focusing on future achievements, missing the satisfaction available in their current work and daily experiences. They develop anxiety disorders from the pressure to perform. They become depressed when they don't advance as quickly as they expected. They develop imposter syndrome, feeling like frauds who don't deserve their success when they do achieve it. They become envious and bitter toward colleagues who seem to advance more easily or receive more recognition. And when they do get the promotion, recognition, salary increase, or prestigious position they wanted, they often discover that it doesn't feel the way they expected it to feel. The satisfaction is more muted than they anticipated, or it fades more quickly than they hoped, or it comes with new pressures, responsibilities, and forms of stress that create different types of suffering. So they set their sights on the next level, and the cycle continues indefinitely. The Stoic approach to career and professional development would be fundamentally different. You would work hard and strive for excellence, but not because you need external validation, specific outcomes, or professional achievements to feel good about yourself as a person. You would work hard because you value craftsmanship, because you want to contribute something meaningful to the world, because you enjoy the process of developing your skills and abilities, because you see work as an opportunity to practice virtue and serve others. You can prefer to advance in your career without making your emotional well-being dependent on advancing. You can put in your best effort without needing to see particular results from that effort. You can compete without being envious of others' success. You can face setbacks without taking them personally or interpreting them as evidence of your inadequacy. You can collaborate with colleagues without constantly calculating how interactions might affect your status or advancement. You can share credit for successes and take responsibility for failures without your ego being threatened. You can receive feedback and criticism without becoming defensive because you see it as information that helps you improve rather than as attacks on your character. This approach actually makes you more effective professionally because you're making decisions based on what's actually best for the work, the organization, and the people you serve rather than on what might advance your personal agenda. You can take risks and innovate because you're not afraid of failure damaging your reputation or derailing your career trajectory. You can focus on long-term value creation rather than short-term impression management. You can be authentic in your interactions rather than strategic, which builds trust and genuine respect from colleagues. You can admit when you don't know something without feeling inadequate, which allows you to learn faster and contribute more effectively. Most importantly, you can enjoy your work more because you're not constantly evaluating it in terms of what it's getting you. You can appreciate the craft of doing good work for its own sake, the satisfaction of solving problems, the pleasure of collaborating with skilled colleagues, the meaning that comes from contributing to something larger than yourself. Romantic relationships and the pursuit of love represent perhaps the most common and intense source of desire-based suffering in human life. Our entire culture is obsessed with romantic love as the solution to existential loneliness and the key to personal fulfillment. We're told to find the one, to complete ourselves through romantic partnership, to prioritize romantic love above all other forms of connection and meaning. Dating apps have turned romantic connection into a consumer experience where you're constantly shopping for someone better, someone more attractive, someone more successful, someone more compatible. People approach dating with a mentality of scarcity and desperate need, constantly evaluating potential partners in terms of what they can provide: emotional validation, social status, financial security, physical attraction, entertainment, companionship, or the solution to loneliness. When you need a relationship to feel complete as a person, you bring that neediness into every interaction with potential partners. You become clingy and possessive because you're afraid of being abandoned. You become jealous and suspicious because you feel like you can't afford to lose what you have or might have. You become manipulative and controlling because you're trying to get your partner to meet emotional needs they can't actually meet. You analyze every text message for hidden meanings. You overthink every interaction. You try to present a perfect version of yourself rather than being authentic. You compromise your values and interests to be more appealing. You tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your standards because you're afraid of being alone. This neediness and attachment creates exactly the kind of relationship dynamic that pushes people away and prevents genuine intimacy from developing. People can sense when they're being related to as a solution to someone else's problems rather than as a complete person worthy of love for their own sake. They feel pressured to be something they're not, to provide something they can't provide, to fill a void they didn't create and can't fill. Even when relationships do develop under these conditions, they tend to be unstable, dramatic, and ultimately unsatisfying because they're based on need rather than choice, on desperation rather than appreciation, on what each person can get rather than what they can give. The Stoic approach to relationships would be to work on becoming complete and fulfilled as an individual first, to develop the capacity for contentment, self-respect, inner peace, and emotional stability that doesn't depend on anyone else's feelings, behavior, or continued presence in your life. To cultivate meaningful friendships, engaging work, personal interests, creative pursuits, and a sense of purpose that make your life rich and satisfying regardless of your relationship status. When you're genuinely okay being alone, when you've learned to enjoy your own company and create a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling on its own, you can be in relationships without neediness, without trying to extract emotional validation from your partner, without making your happiness dependent on their continued affection or presence. You can love someone without possessing them, appreciate them without taking them for granted, support them without trying to control them. You can be vulnerable without being desperate, committed without being clingy, caring without being possessive. You can handle conflict and disagreement without feeling like the relationship is threatened, because you know you'll be okay even if the relationship ends. This makes you much more attractive to potential partners because people are naturally drawn to others who are genuinely content, confident, and don't seem desperate for external validation. It also makes your relationships much healthier and more satisfying because they're based on choice and mutual appreciation rather than need and fear. You can work toward building meaningful connections while understanding that whether you find a compatible partner depends on many factors beyond your control: timing, circumstances, other people's choices, compatibility factors that aren't apparent initially, personal growth trajectories, life situation changes, and the complex chemistry that makes relationships work over time. If you meet someone you're interested in, you can enjoy getting to know them without immediately getting attached to specific outcomes. You can be present in the interactions rather than mentally fast-forwarding to future possibilities. You can appreciate them for who they are, rather than evaluating them primarily in terms of what they might provide for you. If they're not interested in you romantically, you don't take it personally because you understand that compatibility is largely beyond anyone's control, and that rejection usually says more about fit than about worth. You can maintain friendships with people you're attracted to without feeling bitter or resentful that they don't return your romantic interest. Material consumption and the pursuit of possessions represent another major source of desire-based suffering in our consumer-driven culture. We live in a society that constantly tells us we need more stuff to be happy, successful, attractive, or complete. Better clothes, better cars, better houses, better gadgets, better experiences, better lifestyles. The advertising industry has perfected the art of making us feel dissatisfied with what we have and convinced that purchasing something will solve our emotional problems. Advertisements don't sell products. They sell feelings, identities, and solutions to problems. They promise that buying their product will make you feel confident, attractive, successful, loved, respected, or fulfilled. But if you pay careful attention to your actual experience with material purchases, you'll notice the pattern I described earlier playing out repeatedly and predictably. You want something, you suffer from not having it, you think about it frequently, you research options, you save up for it or plan to buy it. You get temporary satisfaction from buying it, that brief consumer high, the pleasure of finally having what you wanted. But then, usually quite quickly, one of several things happens. You either take it for granted, and it becomes just another possession that you barely notice. Or you start wanting something else, something newer, better, more advanced, more impressive. Or you start worrying about maintaining, protecting, or upgrading what you bought. Or you discover that the purchase came with hidden costs, complications, or responsibilities that you didn't anticipate. The new car becomes just your car, with all the associated expenses and maintenance concerns. The new clothes become just clothes in your closet that you barely think about after a few wears. The new house becomes the place where you worry about mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance issues, and home security. The new gadget becomes obsolete within months, as newer versions are released. The stuff never actually delivers the lasting happiness, confidence, status, or life improvement it promises. Material possessions can provide temporary pleasure and practical utility, but they can't provide meaning, connection, purpose, inner peace, or genuine self-worth. These deeper satisfactions come from internal sources and relational experiences that can't be purchased. This doesn't mean you should live in poverty, never buy anything, or feel guilty about enjoying material comforts. It means you should see material purchases for what they actually are: tools that might be useful for specific purposes, but not sources of happiness, fulfillment, or identity. You can prefer to have nice things without needing them for your emotional well-being or self-esteem. You can appreciate beautiful objects without being attached to owning them. You can enjoy comfort and convenience without being enslaved by the desire for more comfort and convenience. You can purchase things based on practical considerations, genuine utility, and appreciation for craftsmanship rather than emotional needs, status seeking, or the belief that objects will transform your life. Social status and the pursuit of recognition represent increasingly prominent sources of suffering in our social media-dominated culture. Human beings are naturally social creatures, and we evolved in small groups where social standing had significant survival implications. We naturally care about how others perceive us, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this basic social awareness. But when this natural tendency becomes a desire for status, fame, recognition, universal approval, or social media validation, it becomes a source of immense suffering and psychological distortion. The person who desires to be liked by everyone makes themselves a slave to everyone's opinion. They can't be authentic because they're constantly adjusting their behavior to get approval. They live in chronic anxiety about what others might think of them. Even when they do get approval, recognition, or social validation, it's never enough, because approval from others is inherently temporary, conditional, and fickle. People's opinions change based on trends, moods, new information, social pressures, and factors that have nothing to do with you. The approval you work so hard to earn can be withdrawn at any moment for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual character or contributions. The person who desires fame or widespread recognition puts their emotional well-being in the hands of strangers who don't know them personally and who may have motivations that conflict with their well-being. They make their sense of self-worth dependent on external validation that they can't control and that often has nothing to do with their actual character, efforts, or contributions to others' lives. Fame, when it comes, often brings its own forms of suffering that people don't anticipate. Loss of privacy, constant scrutiny, the pressure to maintain an image, the realization that being known by millions of people doesn't actually create the connection and meaning they were seeking, the discovery that fame attracts people who are interested in them for the wrong reasons. Consider social media, which has democratized the pursuit of recognition and created new forms of status-seeking behavior that would have been impossible in previous generations. People curate their online presence to get likes, comments, shares, followers, and social validation. They present carefully edited versions of their lives designed to impress others and generate envy or admiration. This social media performance requires enormous amounts of time, energy, and emotional investment. People spend hours crafting posts, selecting photos, writing captions, and monitoring responses. They refresh their feeds compulsively to see how many likes they've gotten. They feel disappointed when posts don't perform as well as expected. They compare their engagement numbers to other people's numbers and feel inadequate when others get more attention. Meanwhile, the validation they do receive from social media is shallow, temporary, and ultimately unsatisfying. Getting a lot of likes on a post provides a brief dopamine hit, but it doesn't create genuine connection, lasting satisfaction, or meaningful relationships. The attention of strangers on the internet is not the same as being known, understood, and appreciated by people who actually care about you as a person. The constant comparison with others' curated presentations creates a distorted perception of reality, where everyone else seems to be living more interesting, successful, attractive, or fulfilling lives than you are. You start to feel like your actual life is boring, inadequate, or unsuccessful compared to the highlight reels you see online. The Stoics understood that true self-worth and genuine confidence have to come from internal sources. They have to be based on your character, your efforts, your integrity, your contributions to others' well-being, your adherence to your values, things that actually depend on you and reflect who you are as a person rather than how others perceive you. When your sense of self is grounded in who you are rather than what others think of you, you're free to be authentic, to make choices based on what's actually right rather than what will get approval, to express your genuine thoughts and feelings rather than what you think people want to hear. You can appreciate positive feedback when you receive it without depending on it for your self-esteem. You can handle criticism and rejection without taking them personally or interpreting them as accurate assessments of your worth. You can pursue meaningful goals without needing external recognition to validate your efforts or achievements. Health, physical appearance, and the pursuit of bodily perfection have become increasingly significant sources of desire-based suffering in our youth-obsessed, appearance-focused culture. We're constantly bombarded with messages about how we should look, how much we should weigh, how fit we should be, how young we should appear, how perfect our bodies should be. This creates enormous suffering around the natural processes of aging and the inevitable imperfections and limitations of human bodies. People make themselves miserable trying to achieve and maintain physical standards that are often unrealistic, unsustainable, digitally manipulated, or based on genetic factors largely outside their control. They spend enormous amounts of time, energy, money, and mental bandwidth pursuing physical improvements that provide only temporary satisfaction and often lead to new insecurities or concerns. The desired weight loss is achieved, but then there's a new target weight or a different body part to focus on. The desired muscle gain is achieved, but then there's a new fitness goal or aesthetic standard to pursue. The desired cosmetic improvement is achieved, but then there's another perceived flaw to fix. The desire to look a certain way or achieve a particular physical ideal often leads to unhealthy behaviors and psychological distortion. Extreme dieting that damages metabolism and creates obsessive relationships with food. Excessive exercise that leads to injury and burnout. Cosmetic surgery that carries risks and often creates new insecurities. Eating disorders that can be life-threatening. Body dysmorphia that creates distorted self-perception. Paradoxically, the desire to be healthy often makes people less healthy because they're approaching health from a place of dissatisfaction, self-criticism, and desperation rather than from a place of care, appreciation, and stewardship for their bodies. The person who exercises because they hate their body and want to punish it for being imperfect approaches fitness differently than the person who exercises because they appreciate what their body can do and want to support its optimal functioning. The person who diets because they're disgusted with their appearance makes different food choices than the person who eats well because they want to nourish themselves and feel energetic. The Stoic approach would be to take excellent care of your body because it's the vehicle you've been given for this life, but without attachment to specific physical outcomes that don't entirely depend on you. You'd eat well and exercise regularly because these activities make you feel good and support your overall well-being, not because you're trying to achieve a particular appearance or meet external standards of attractiveness. You'd appreciate your body for what it can do rather than constantly criticizing it for how it looks. You'd understand that aging is a natural process that everyone goes through, and that trying to stop or reverse it completely is like trying to stop the sun from setting. You'd accept that bodies come in different shapes, sizes, and capabilities, and that your worth as a person has nothing to do with how closely you conform to cultural beauty standards. You'd take reasonable precautions to maintain your health, while accepting that illness, injury, and physical decline are part of the human experience that you can influence, but not control completely. You can prefer to be healthy without being devastated if you get sick. You can work to maintain your physical capabilities without defining your worth by your physical performance or appearance. This doesn't mean giving up on health, fitness, or self-care. It means approaching these areas from a place of gratitude and stewardship, rather than from a place of dissatisfaction and control. When you take care of your body because you appreciate it rather than because you're trying to fix it or make it conform to external standards, the whole process becomes more enjoyable, sustainable, and actually effective. The search for meaning and purpose has become a particularly acute source of existential suffering in our individualistic, choice-rich, traditional meaning-structure depleted culture. Many people experience intense anxiety and depression because they desire to find their purpose, their calling, their unique contribution to the world, or the thing that will make their life feel meaningful and significant. This desire for meaning often creates a kind of existential pressure where people are constantly questioning whether they're doing the right thing with their lives, whether they're making a difference, whether their existence matters, whether they're living up to their potential, whether they're wasting their limited time on Earth. They compare themselves to people who seem to have found their purpose and feel inadequate by comparison. They read about entrepreneurs who are changing the world, artists who are creating meaningful work, activists who are fighting for important causes, and they feel like their own lives are small, insignificant, or purposeless in comparison. They spend enormous amounts of energy trying to discover their passion, their calling, their unique contribution to the world. They take personality tests, attend workshops, read self-help books, change careers repeatedly, and constantly search for external validation that they're on the right path or doing something worthwhile. But this search for some predetermined purpose that's waiting out there for them to discover often prevents them from appreciating the meaning that's available to them right now in their current circumstances. They're so focused on finding their grand calling that they miss opportunities to contribute, connect, and create meaning in their daily lives and immediate relationships. The Stoics would approach this very differently. They would say that meaning doesn't come from finding some specific predetermined purpose that's uniquely yours to fulfill. Meaning comes from living according to virtue, from doing your best with whatever circumstances you find yourself in, from contributing to the common good in whatever way is available to you, from treating others well, from developing your character, and from appreciating the opportunities for growth and service that exist in any situation. You don't need to be Gandhi, Einstein, or Martin Luther King Jr. to live a meaningful life. You can find deep meaning and satisfaction in being a good friend, a caring family member, a helpful colleague, a kind neighbor, a responsible citizen. You can find meaning in doing your work well, whatever that work might be, if you approach it with the right attitude and commitment to excellence. You can find meaning in raising children thoughtfully, in creating art that moves people, in solving problems that make life easier for others, in preserving traditions that matter to your community, in teaching skills that help people succeed, in simply being a decent human being who makes the world a slightly better place by existing in it with integrity and kindness. The search for some grand, unique purpose often prevents people from appreciating the meaning that's available to them right now. They're looking for something extraordinary while missing the significance of ordinary kindness, ordinary competence, ordinary presence, and ordinary contribution to the lives of the people around them. The Stoic approach would be to focus on being virtuous and helpful in whatever situation you find yourself in, trusting that this approach will naturally lead to a meaningful life without you having to manufacture meaning or discover some secret purpose that's hidden from you. You can prefer to do work that feels meaningful and significant while understanding that any honest work can be done meaningfully if you approach it with the right attitude, commitment to excellence, and awareness of how it serves others. You can hope to make a significant contribution while appreciating the small contributions you're already making every day through your interactions, efforts, and choices. Perfectionism and the desire to never make mistakes represent another major source of suffering that's particularly prevalent among high-achieving, conscientious people. Many people torture themselves with the desire to be perfect, to never make errors, to always know the right thing to do, to have complete control over their performance and outcomes. This desire for perfection creates enormous anxiety and paralysis, because perfection is literally impossible for human beings. We are fallible creatures who learn through trial and error, who make mistakes as a natural part of growth and discovery, who operate with incomplete information and limited understanding. The perfectionist is constantly disappointed with their performance, constantly worried about making mistakes, constantly comparing their real efforts to imaginary perfect efforts that no one has ever actually achieved. They often procrastinate because they're afraid their work won't be good enough. They often avoid taking risks because they can't tolerate the possibility of failure. They often criticize themselves harshly for normal human errors and limitations. The perfectionist lives in a state of chronic dissatisfaction because reality can never match their impossible standards. They can't enjoy their accomplishments because they're always focused on the flaws, mistakes, or ways things could have been better. They can't appreciate progress because they're only satisfied with perfection, which means they're never satisfied with anything they actually accomplish. This perfectionism often stems from childhood experiences where love, approval, or safety was conditional on performance, where mistakes were met with criticism or rejection, where children learned that their worth depended on meeting impossibly high standards. But regardless of its origins, perfectionism creates enormous suffering and actually interferes with performance and achievement. The Stoics understood that humans are fallible beings who learn through experience, experimentation, and yes, through making mistakes. They valued progress over perfection, effort over results, wisdom over knowledge, character development over flawless performance. They understood that making mistakes is how you learn, that facing failure is how you build resilience, that accepting your limitations is how you find peace and develop realistic expectations. The Stoic approach to perfectionism would be to do your best work while accepting that your best will never be perfect, and that this is not only okay but actually valuable. You'd focus on learning from mistakes rather than avoiding them. You'd measure yourself against your own past performance rather than against imaginary perfect standards that no one actually achieves. You'd understand that excellence is a direction, not a destination. You can always improve, but you'll never reach a point where improvement is no longer possible or necessary. This understanding allows you to enjoy the process of getting better, rather than being frustrated by never being perfect. This approach actually leads to better performance, because you're not paralyzed by fear of failure or mistakes. You can take risks, experiment, and iterate because you're not attached to getting everything right the first time. You can receive feedback without taking it personally, because you understand that criticism is information that helps you improve rather than judgment on your worth as a person. Justice, fairness, and political engagement represent another area where desire creates enormous suffering for people who care deeply about ethics and social issues. Many people experience intense emotional distress because they desire for the world to be fair, for bad people to be punished, for good people to be rewarded, for justice to always prevail, for systems to work as they should. When they see injustice, inequality, corruption, suffering, or unfairness, they become angry, frustrated, bitter, despairing, and sometimes obsessively focused on problems they can't directly solve. They spend enormous amounts of emotional energy being outraged about things they can't control. They make their peace of mind dependent on external events and social conditions that don't depend on their individual efforts or choices. They watch the news and become depressed about political developments. They see wealthy people escaping consequences for harmful actions and become cynical about the legal system. They see good people suffering from poverty, illness, or oppression and become angry at God, the universe, or human nature. They see inequality and become overwhelmed by the magnitude of social problems. This emotional reactivity to injustice often makes them less effective at actually addressing the problems they care about. They burn out from emotional exhaustion. They become bitter and angry in ways that push people away. They make decisions based on outrage rather than strategic thinking. They alienate potential allies through their intensity or self-righteousness. The Stoics understood that the world is not always fair, that bad things happen to good people, that justice doesn't always prevail in the short term, that powerful people often escape consequences for their actions, that systems are imperfect and often serve the interests of those who design them, rather than those who are affected by them. They didn't think this was good or desirable, but they accepted it as a fact about the nature of reality in a complex world with many competing interests, limited resources, imperfect information, and flawed human beings in positions of authority. This acceptance didn't make them passive or indifferent to injustice. Many Stoics were actively involved in politics, law, and social reform. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who tried to govern justly and implemented progressive policies. Seneca was involved in politics and wrote extensively about ethics and governance. Epictetus taught about the importance of treating all people with dignity regardless of their social status. But they approached these activities from a place of duty and contribution rather than from a place of attachment to specific outcomes. They worked for justice while understanding that they might not see the results of their work in their lifetime. They fought against injustice while accepting that they couldn't control whether justice ultimately prevailed in particular cases. You can be outraged by unfairness while not letting that outrage consume your inner peace or distort your judgment. You can work to make the world better while accepting that the world's problems are bigger than any individual can solve. You can care deeply about social issues while understanding that your emotional well-being can't depend on social progress happening at the pace you'd prefer. This approach is actually more effective for creating positive change because you're not burned out by emotional reactivity. You can persist longer, think more clearly, and work more strategically when you're not emotionally devastated every time things don't go your way. You can maintain relationships with people who disagree with you politically, which is often necessary for building coalitions and finding practical solutions to complex problems. When your identity isn't fused with your political positions, you can engage with different perspectives without feeling personally attacked. You can change your mind when presented with new evidence without feeling like you're betraying your core self. You can work with imperfect allies and compromise when necessary without feeling like you're selling out your principles. Now, let's explore some deeper psychological and philosophical dimensions of desire that help explain why this ancient wisdom is so relevant to contemporary life. The neurobiological basis of desire and suffering provides fascinating insights that validate many Stoic observations about human psychology. Modern neuroscience has shown that the brain systems involved in wanting something are different from the systems involved in enjoying or being satisfied by that thing. The neurotransmitter dopamine, which drives seeking behavior and creates the feeling of wanting, doesn't actually create pleasure or satisfaction when you get what you want. This explains why getting what you want often doesn't feel as good as you expected it would when you were wanting it. The anticipation created by dopamine is often more intense than the actual experience of having what you anticipated. This is why people can achieve everything they thought they wanted and still feel empty or restless. The brain is also wired to adapt to positive experiences through a process called hedonic adaptation. When something good happens to you repeatedly, your neural response to it diminishes over time. This is why the first bite of chocolate tastes better than the 10th, why the first day of vacation feels more exciting than the 7th, why the first $1 million feels more significant than the second. Your brain is designed to return to baseline levels of satisfaction even after positive events, which explains why external achievements don't provide lasting happiness. This neurological reality validates the Stoic insight that happiness must come from internal sources rather than external circumstances. The psychological concept of attachment theory also provides insights into why desire creates suffering. People who developed insecure attachment styles in childhood often become adults who seek security, love, and validation through external sources. They use romantic relationships, career achievements, material possessions, or social status to try to meet emotional needs that weren't adequately met early in life. But these external sources can never actually provide the deep security and unconditional love that was missing in childhood. No romantic partner can heal childhood wounds. No career success can undo early experiences of feeling inadequate or unloved. No amount of money or recognition can fill the void left by early emotional neglect or trauma. Trying to meet these deep psychological needs through external achievements is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. The only way to address attachment-related suffering is to develop the capacity for self-compassion, emotional regulation, and internal security that doesn't depend on external sources. The cultural and historical context of desire in modern society reveals how our current environment amplifies the natural human tendency toward wanting in ways that previous generations couldn't have imagined. For most of human history, people lived in small communities where social comparison was limited to a few dozen or few hundred people they knew personally. Today, social media exposes us to the highlight reels of millions of people around the world, creating unprecedented opportunities for comparison and envy. For most of human history, people had limited choices about their careers, lifestyles, and life partners. Today, the abundance of choice creates decision paralysis and constant second-guessing. For most of human history, people lived in traditional communities with clear social roles and shared meaning systems that provided identity and purpose. Today, we're expected to create our own meaning and identity, which often leads to existential anxiety and the desperate search for purpose. Consumer capitalism deliberately cultivates dissatisfaction because economic growth depends on people constantly wanting more than they have. Advertising psychology has become increasingly sophisticated at triggering desires and making people feel inadequate about their current circumstances. The pace of technological change means that anything you acquire quickly becomes obsolete, reinforcing the sense that you need to keep upgrading and improving to keep up. The global economy creates constant economic uncertainty that makes financial security feel elusive, even for people who are objectively wealthy by historical standards. Understanding these cultural factors helps explain why ancient wisdom about desire is so relevant today. We're not dealing with the same level of desire stimulation that humans evolved to handle. We're like people from a traditional culture who've been transported to Las Vegas and expected to maintain their emotional equilibrium in an environment designed to overstimulate their reward systems. The philosophical implications of taking Stoic insights about desire seriously are profound and far-reaching. If happiness truly doesn't come from getting what you want, but from appreciating what you have and developing internal sources of contentment, then much of what our culture teaches about success, achievement, and the good life is not just wrong, but actively harmful. If emotional well-being comes from internal sources rather than external circumstances, then the pursuit of wealth, status, recognition, and material possessions as sources of happiness is not just misguided but counterproductive. This doesn't mean these things are inherently bad, but that relating to them as sources of happiness creates suffering. If meaning comes from character development and contribution, rather than from finding your unique purpose or calling, then the contemporary obsession with self-discovery and personal fulfillment might be missing the point. You don't need to find yourself, you need to create yourself through your choices and actions. If freedom comes from wanting what you have rather than getting what you want, then true liberation is available to anyone regardless of their circumstances. This is perhaps the most radical insight in all of philosophy, that happiness is available to everyone, right now, regardless of their external situation. Now, let's explore specific practical exercises and approaches for working with desire in daily life, because understanding the theory is only valuable if you can apply it to your actual experience in ways that reduce suffering and increase genuine well-being. The first and most fundamental practice is developing what we might call desire awareness or desire observation. Throughout each day, practice noticing when desires arise without trying to suppress them, judge them as good or bad, or immediately act on them. Simply observe them with curiosity and interest, the way a scientist might observe a natural phenomenon. Notice what triggers desires in your daily life. Pay attention to how advertisements, social media, conversations with friends, walking past stores, seeing other people's possessions or achievements, thinking about the future, or comparing yourself to others creates wanting in your mind and body. Notice the physical and emotional sensations that accompany desire. What does wanting feel like in your body? Is there tension, restlessness, a sense of reaching or grasping? Is there a feeling of incompleteness or lack? Do you notice your attention becoming fixated on the object of desire? Do you feel urgency or anxiety about getting what you want? Notice how desire affects your perception and thinking. When you want something, how does it change what you pay attention to? Do you start seeing everything in terms of whether it helps or hinders your chances of getting what you desire? Do you start planning and scheming about how to get it? Do you start fantasizing about how your life will be different when you have it? Notice how desires change over time. Some desires are fleeting and disappear quickly if you don't feed them with attention. Others persist and seem to grow stronger the more you think about them. Some desires that felt urgent yesterday feel unimportant today. Some things you desperately wanted in the past no longer interest you at all. The goal of this practice isn't to eliminate desires or to judge yourself for having them. The goal is simply to become conscious of how desire operates in your mind and life. Most people are so habituated to wanting that they don't even notice it. It's like background noise that they've learned to tune out. But you can't work skillfully with something you're not aware of. This observation practice helps you see desire as a mental and emotional phenomenon rather than as an accurate reflection of what you actually need or what would actually improve your life. You start to notice that desires often come and go without any relationship to your actual circumstances. You start to see that many desires are triggered by external stimuli rather than arising from genuine needs or values. The second practice is desire questioning or desire inquiry. When you notice a strong desire arising, instead of immediately pursuing it or trying to suppress it, pause and ask yourself some specific questions designed to help you understand what you're really seeking and whether getting the external thing would actually provide it. What do I think getting this thing will do for me? What feeling or state do I think it will provide? What problem do I think it will solve? What fear do I think it will eliminate? What need do I think it will meet? How do I imagine my life will be different when I have this thing? For example, if you desire a promotion at work, you might realize that what you really want is a sense of accomplishment, recognition for your efforts, financial security, or validation that you're competent and valuable. If you desire a romantic relationship, you might realize that what you really want is connection, love, intimacy, companionship, or the feeling that you're worthy of love. If you desire a particular purchase, you might realize that what you really want is a sense of abundance, status, convenience, beauty in your environment, or the belief that this object will make some aspect of your life more enjoyable or efficient. Once you've identified what you think the external thing will provide, ask yourself, is there a way I can cultivate this feeling or state directly without needing to get the external thing? Can I find ways to feel accomplished and recognized that don't depend on my boss's decision? Can I find ways to experience connection and love that don't depend on finding a romantic partner? Often, the underlying feeling or state you're seeking through desire can be cultivated directly through internal practices, through different ways of relating to yourself and others, through appreciating what you already have, through changing your perspective on your current circumstances, or through expressing your values in your daily actions. If you want to feel accomplished, you can appreciate the work you're already doing. Set personal standards of excellence that don't depend on external recognition, or find ways to contribute that feel meaningful, regardless of whether anyone notices. If you want to feel loved, you can practice self-compassion. Appreciate the love that's already present in your life through friends and family, or express love toward others without needing it to be returned. If you want to feel abundant, you can practice gratitude for what you already have. Recognize the many ways you're already wealthy compared to most people throughout history, or appreciate non-material forms of abundance like beautiful sunsets, interesting conversations, or moments of peace and contentment. The third practice is negative visualization or premeditatio malorum, which involves regularly imagining losing the things you currently have or not getting the things you currently want. This might sound depressing or pessimistic, but it actually serves several important psychological functions that reduce suffering and increase appreciation. When you have a strong desire for something, spend some time imagining not getting it. Not to be pessimistic or to create negative expectations, but to prepare yourself emotionally and to realize that you'd be okay even if the desire isn't fulfilled. If you want a particular job, imagine not getting it. How would you handle that disappointment? What would you do next? How would you find meaning and satisfaction despite the setback? What other opportunities might open up if this one doesn't work out? What would you learn from the experience of not getting what you wanted? If you want a relationship to work out, imagine it ending. How would you take care of yourself emotionally? What support would you seek from friends and family? What would you learn from the experience? How would you grow as a person? What aspects of your life are already fulfilling that don't depend on this relationship? If you want to achieve a particular goal, imagine failing to achieve it. How would you redefine success? What other goals might become available to you? What would you do with the time and energy you've been spending on this pursuit? How might failure teach you something valuable about yourself or your priorities? This exercise often reveals that your worst-case scenarios aren't actually as catastrophic as they seem when you're in the grip of desire. You'd adapt. You'd find other sources of meaning and satisfaction. You'd discover inner resources you didn't know you had. You'd be okay. You might even discover opportunities or possibilities that wouldn't have been available if you had gotten what you originally wanted. For things you already have, practice imagining losing them. If you have a comfortable home, imagine what it would be like to live somewhere smaller or less convenient. If you have a good job, imagine what it would be like to be unemployed or working in a less desirable position. If you have people in your life who love you, imagine what it would be like if they were no longer present. This isn't about being morbid or creating anxiety about loss. It's about appreciating what you have while you have it and preparing yourself emotionally for the inevitable changes and losses that are part of life. When you regularly contemplate the temporary nature of everything you possess, you become less attached to keeping it forever and more appreciative of having it now. This practice also reveals how much abundance is already present in your life. When you imagine losing your health, you appreciate how miraculous it is that your body works as well as it does. When you imagine losing your freedom, you appreciate how extraordinary it is to be able to make choices about how to spend your time. When you imagine losing your relationships, you appreciate how precious it is to have people who care about you. The fourth practice is present moment anchoring or mindfulness. Since desire always pulls your attention into imaginary futures, where you have what you want, or fears about not getting what you want, practice repeatedly bringing your attention back to what's actually happening right now in your immediate experience. Throughout the day, ask yourself, what am I actually experiencing right now? What am I seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching in this moment? What's actually present in my immediate experience as opposed to what I'm thinking about, planning, or imagining? When you notice your mind getting pulled into fantasies about getting what you want or worries about not getting it, gently redirect your attention to immediate sensory experience. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breathing without trying to change it. Look at what's actually in front of you, rather than what you're imagining. This isn't about suppressing thoughts about the future or never planning ahead. It's about not getting lost in mental projections that pull you out of your actual life. You can plan for the future and work toward goals while staying grounded in present moment awareness. The key is to do your planning consciously and intentionally, rather than getting swept away by compulsive mental activity driven by desire. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens, where satisfaction can actually be experienced, where peace can actually be found, where beauty can actually be appreciated, where connection can actually occur. When you're constantly focused on future possibilities or past regrets, you miss the richness and fullness of what's available to you right now. Most people spend very little time actually present in their lives. They're almost always somewhere else mentally, reliving the past, anticipating the future, comparing their current experience to other possibilities, or lost in thoughts about what they want or don't want. This mental time travel prevents them from fully experiencing their actual lives. When you practice present moment awareness, you often discover that your current experience is actually quite rich, interesting, and satisfying when you're fully present to it. The problem isn't usually with what's happening, it's with your lack of attention to what's happening because you're so focused on what you want to be happening instead. The fifth practice is gratitude and appreciation, but approached in a much deeper and more systematic way than the superficial gratitude practices that have become popular in self-help culture. Instead of just making lists of things you're thankful for, practice sustained embodied appreciation for what you already have. Choose one thing in your life that you typically take for granted, and spend extended time really appreciating it. If you have a place to live, spend time appreciating the shelter it provides, the comfort it offers, the privacy it gives you, the protection from weather, the space to keep your possessions, the ability to have guests, the memories you've created there. Don't just think about these things intellectually. Actually feel grateful for them in your body and emotions. Notice how remarkable it is that you have access to running water, electricity, heating and cooling, indoor plumbing, and all the other conveniences that billions of people throughout history never had access to. If you have food to eat, spend time appreciating the nourishment it provides, the pleasure of taste and texture, the fact that your basic needs are met, the complex systems of agriculture and distribution that bring food to you, the people who grew, transported, and prepared it. Notice how extraordinary it is that you have choices about what to eat, that you rarely experience hunger, that you can enjoy food for pleasure as well as nutrition. If you have people in your life who care about you, spend time appreciating their presence, their support, their unique qualities, the experiences you've shared, the love they've shown you, the ways they've helped you grow and learn. Notice specific things they've done for you, ways they've been there during difficult times, moments of connection and joy you've experienced together. If you have work to do, appreciate the opportunity to contribute something meaningful, the skills you get to use and develop, the problems you get to solve, the income it provides, the structure it gives to your days, the colleagues you get to interact with, the sense of purpose it provides. This practice isn't about convincing yourself that everything is perfect or that you shouldn't want anything different. It's about developing the capacity for contentment that doesn't depend on getting more things, achieving more goals, or changing your external circumstances. When you can genuinely appreciate what you have, desire loses much of its compulsive quality. You start to realize that you already have enormous abundance, that your life is already full of good things, that happiness and satisfaction are available to you right now if you know how to recognize them. This doesn't eliminate preferences or goals, but it provides a foundation of contentment that doesn't depend on external achievements or acquisitions. The sixth practice is identity work and values clarification. Spend time clarifying who you are independent of your desires, achievements, possessions, relationships, or social roles. What are your core values? What kind of person do you want to be regardless of what you have or accomplish? How do you want to treat others? How do you want to respond to both success and failure? What qualities do you want to cultivate in yourself that don't depend on external circumstances? Kindness, honesty, courage, wisdom, patience, generosity, humor, creativity, resilience, compassion. These are characteristics that you can develop and express regardless of whether you get what you want, regardless of your job title, relationship status, income level, or social position. Write down your core values and refer to them regularly. When you're faced with decisions, ask yourself which choice would be most aligned with your values rather than which choice would be most likely to get you what you want. When you're struggling with setbacks or disappointments, remind yourself of the kind of person you want to be and focus on expressing that character regardless of your circumstances. When your sense of identity is grounded in character rather than achievements, in internal qualities rather than external circumstances, you become much less vulnerable to the emotional turbulence that desire creates. You can pursue goals and preferences without making your self-worth dependent on results. You can fail at specific endeavors without feeling like you've failed as a person. You can succeed at specific endeavors without feeling like your success defines who you are. You can change direction when circumstances change without experiencing an identity crisis. You can face criticism without being defensive and receive praise without becoming arrogant. The seventh practice is values-based action rather than desire-driven behavior. Instead of being pulled around by whatever you happen to want in the moment, identify what you truly value and let those values guide your choices and actions consistently. What do you value? Learning and growth? Contributing to others' well-being? Creating beauty? Solving problems? Building relationships? Expressing creativity? Pursuing truth? Developing skills? These values can guide your actions regardless of whether those actions lead to the specific outcomes you desire. For example, if you value learning and growth, you can pursue challenging experiences, read books that expand your thinking, have conversations with people who disagree with you, take on projects that stretch your capabilities, travel to places that expose you to different ways of life. You do these things because learning is intrinsically valuable to you, not because you desire the status, recognition, or advantage that comes with being knowledgeable. If you value contribution and service, you can look for ways to help others, to make a positive difference in your community, to use your skills and resources for the benefit of something larger than yourself, to leave things better than you found them. You help because helping is intrinsically meaningful to you, not because you desire gratitude, recognition, or reciprocation. If you value beauty and creativity, you can create art, cultivate aesthetic experiences, surround yourself with beautiful objects, appreciate natural beauty, support other people's creative work. You do this because beauty and creativity are inherently valuable to you, not because you desire fame, money, or validation as an artist. This values-based approach to life is not only more emotionally stable and psychologically healthy, but also more ethically sound and practically effective. When you're driven by desire, you often end up acting in ways that compromise your integrity because you're so focused on getting what you want that you lose sight of how you're trying to get it. You might lie to get a job you want. You might manipulate someone to get their affection. You might cut corners to achieve success faster. You might betray friends to advance your own interests. You might sacrifice your health to earn more money. The desire becomes so important that you're willing to sacrifice your character to satisfy it. But when you're guided by values, your actions naturally tend toward virtue because you're focused on being the kind of person you want to be, rather than on acquiring particular things or outcomes. Your character becomes more important than your achievements. Your integrity becomes more important than your advantages. The eighth practice is philosophical study and reflection. Read the works of Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, not just for intellectual understanding, but for practical guidance in daily life. These ancient thinkers faced the same fundamental human challenges you face today: disappointment, loss, uncertainty, difficult relationships, social pressure, and the challenge of finding meaning and peace in an unpredictable world. Spend time each day reading short passages from Stoic texts and reflecting on how they apply to your current circumstances. Keep a journal where you write about your experiences with desire, your efforts to apply Stoic principles, and your observations about what creates suffering and what creates peace in your life. When you encounter challenging situations, ask yourself, how would a Stoic sage handle this? What would Marcus Aurelius do in this situation? How can I respond in a way that aligns with Stoic principles? What can I control in this situation? And what should I accept as beyond my control? The ninth practice is community and discussion. Find others who are interested in Stoic philosophy and practical wisdom. Discuss these ideas with friends, family members, or online communities. Teaching these concepts to others often deepens your own understanding and commitment to practicing them. Share your experiences with trying to work with desire rather than being controlled by it. Support others who are struggling with similar challenges. Learn from people who have successfully applied these principles in their own lives. Having a community of people who share these values makes it much easier to maintain your practice when you're surrounded by a culture that encourages desire and consumption. The 10th practice is meditation and contemplation. Develop a regular practice of sitting quietly and observing your mind without trying to control or change your thoughts. Notice how desires arise and pass away. Notice how attachment to particular outcomes creates tension and anxiety. Notice how letting go of attachment creates peace and freedom. You don't need any special technique or training to do this. Simply sit comfortably, close your eyes, and pay attention to your thoughts and feelings without getting caught up in them. When you notice desires arising, observe them with curiosity rather than immediately pursuing them or trying to suppress them. Notice how some desires feel urgent and important when they first arise, but lose their intensity if you don't feed them with attention and mental energy. Notice how other desires persist and seem to grow stronger the more you think about them. Notice how your relationship to desires changes when you observe them rather than immediately acting on them. This meditation practice helps you develop what Buddhists call non-attachment and what Stoics call emotional equanimity. You learn to experience desires without being controlled by them, to have preferences without being enslaved by them, to want things without needing them for your emotional well-being. Now let's explore some specific areas where these practices can be applied to address the most common sources of desire-based suffering in contemporary life. Working with career and professional desires requires a fundamental shift in how you think about work, success, and achievement. Instead of approaching your career as a means to get things you want, money, status, recognition, security, power, approach it as an opportunity to express your values, develop your capabilities, and contribute something meaningful to the world. Focus on doing excellent work for its own sake rather than for what it might get you. Take pride in craftsmanship, attention to detail, problem solving, and service to others. Measure success by internal standards, whether you're growing, learning, contributing, and acting with integrity, rather than by external metrics like salary, title, or recognition. When you don't get the promotion, job, or recognition you wanted, practice seeing it as information rather than rejection. Maybe you need to develop different skills. Maybe this particular opportunity wasn't the right fit. Maybe something better is available that you wouldn't have pursued if you had gotten what you originally wanted. Use setbacks as opportunities to practice resilience, to clarify your values, and to develop character. Some of the most important lessons in life come from not getting what you want and learning to find meaning and satisfaction despite disappointment. Working with relationship desires involves developing the capacity to love without possessing, to care without controlling, to connect without clinging. Practice appreciating the people in your life for who they are rather than for what they provide for you. Express love and kindness without expecting specific responses or behaviors in return. If you're single and desire a romantic relationship, focus first on becoming the kind of person you'd want to be in a relationship with. Develop interests, friendships, and sources of meaning that make your life fulfilling regardless of your relationship status. Practice enjoying your own company and creating a life that feels rich and satisfying on its own. When you do meet someone you're interested in, practice being present with them rather than immediately projecting into the future or evaluating them primarily in terms of relationship potential. Appreciate getting to know them without being attached to any particular outcome. If you're in a relationship, practice loving your partner without trying to change them or control their feelings and behavior. Accept that they're a separate person with their own thoughts, feelings, and life path. Support their growth and happiness without making your own happiness dependent on their choices. Working with material desires involves recognizing the difference between genuine needs and manufactured wants. Before making purchases, especially significant ones, practice pausing and asking yourself, do I actually need this, or do I just want it? What do I think this purchase will do for me emotionally? Is there another way to meet that need that doesn't involve buying something? When you do buy things, appreciate them fully while you have them, without becoming attached to keeping them forever. Take good care of your possessions while understanding that they're temporary and that your worth as a person has nothing to do with what you own. Practice finding beauty and satisfaction in simplicity. Notice how having fewer possessions can actually create more freedom, less stress, and more appreciation for what you do have. Experiment with living with less, and see how it affects your sense of contentment and peace. Working with social media and comparison involves using these platforms consciously and sparingly. When you do use social media, remember that you're seeing curated highlights rather than complete pictures of people's lives. Practice appreciation for your own experiences rather than comparing them to other people's presentations. Consider taking regular breaks from social media to reconnect with your actual life and relationships. Notice how much more present and content you feel when you're not constantly exposed to other people's achievements and possessions. When you do see content that triggers envy or inadequacy, use it as a prompt for gratitude practice. If someone's vacation photos make you feel bad about your own life, spend time appreciating the good things in your current situation rather than focusing on what you don't have. Working with health and appearance desires involves approaching your body with appreciation and stewardship rather than criticism and control. Take excellent care of your physical health because you value the body you've been given, not because you're trying to achieve a particular appearance or meet external standards. Exercise because you enjoy movement and appreciate what your body can do, not because you hate your body and want to punish it. Eat well because you want to nourish yourself and feel energetic, not because you're trying to achieve a particular weight or appearance. Accept that aging, illness, and physical decline are natural parts of the human experience. Take reasonable precautions to maintain your health, while understanding that you can't control all health outcomes. Focus on what your body can do rather than on how it looks. Working with meaning and purpose desires involves finding significance in whatever circumstances you find yourself in rather than searching for some predetermined calling or grand purpose. Look for opportunities to be helpful, kind, and excellent in your current situation rather than waiting until you find your true purpose. Appreciate the meaning that's available in ordinary activities. Preparing food, caring for others, solving problems, creating beauty, learning new things. You don't need to save the world or become famous to live a meaningful life. Small acts of kindness and competence create enormous meaning when done with the right intention and attention. Now, let's address some of the most common objections and challenges that arise when people try to apply these principles in their daily lives. But doesn't this approach lead to mediocrity and lack of achievement? This is perhaps the most frequent concern people express about working with desire in the way the Stoics recommend. The fear is that if you're not driven by intense desire for success, recognition, or achievement, you'll become passive, complacent, and mediocre. In reality, the opposite tends to be true. When you're not emotionally attached to specific outcomes, you can often perform better because you're not anxious about results. When you're not desperate for success, you can take risks that people who are attached to specific outcomes can't take. When you're not worried about failure damaging your self-image, you can experiment, innovate, and learn from mistakes more effectively. Many of the greatest achievements in human history came from people who were internally motivated, rather than externally driven. They were doing work they found inherently meaningful, rather than work they thought would get them something. Scientists make discoveries because they're curious about how the world works, not primarily because they desire fame or money. Artists create because they're compelled to express something, not primarily because they desire recognition or wealth. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can also adapt and pivot more easily when circumstances change. People who are rigidly attached to particular goals often miss better opportunities because they're tunnel-visioned on what they originally wanted. How can I stay motivated without desire driving me? This question reveals a misunderstanding about motivation. There are two fundamentally different types of motivation: intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic motivation comes from wanting external rewards like money, recognition, status, or approval. Intrinsic motivation comes from finding the activity itself meaningful, interesting, or aligned with your values. Research in psychology consistently shows that intrinsic motivation is more sustainable, leads to better performance, and creates more satisfaction than extrinsic motivation. When you're doing something because you find it inherently valuable, you don't need external rewards to maintain your effort and engagement. The Stoic approach cultivates intrinsic motivation by focusing on values, character development, and contribution rather than on external rewards. When you're motivated by the desire to do excellent work, to help others, to learn and grow, to express creativity, or to live according to your principles, you don't need external incentives to stay engaged. Isn't some level of dissatisfaction necessary for progress and improvement? This question reflects a common misunderstanding about the relationship between contentment and growth. You can be content with your current circumstances while still working toward improvement and change. You can appreciate what you have while also preferring something different. The key distinction is between preference and attachment. You can prefer to have better health, relationships, or living conditions without making your happiness dependent on achieving these improvements. You can work toward goals without needing to achieve them for your emotional well-being. Contentment doesn't mean complacency or resignation. It means having a foundation of satisfaction that doesn't depend on external changes, while still being open to growth, learning, and improvement. When you're content, you actually have more energy and clarity available for positive change, because you're not wasting emotional resources on anxiety, resentment, or desperate striving. How do I handle other people who don't understand or support this approach? This is a practical challenge that many people face when they start applying Stoic principles in a culture that encourages desire, consumption, and external achievement as measures of success and happiness. Some people in your life might interpret your lack of attachment to specific outcomes as lack of ambition or caring. They might worry that you're giving up on yourself or becoming passive. They might not understand why you're not constantly striving for more money, status, or possessions. The best approach is usually to focus on your actions rather than trying to explain your philosophy. Continue to work hard, treat people well, and pursue meaningful goals, but without the anxiety, desperation, or attachment that you might have had before. Most people will judge you by your behavior rather than by your stated beliefs. When people do ask about your approach, you can explain it in terms they're likely to understand. Instead of talking about non-attachment to outcomes, you might say that you're focused on doing your best work and letting the results take care of themselves. Instead of talking about desire as the source of suffering, you might say that you've found more peace and effectiveness by focusing on what you can control rather than worrying about what you can't control. What about goals and planning for the future? Working with desire skillfully doesn't mean abandoning all goals or never planning for the future. It means holding your goals lightly, as preferences rather than requirements for happiness. You can work towards specific outcomes while understanding that your well-being doesn't depend on achieving them. The Stoic approach to goal setting involves focusing on process goals rather than outcome goals. Instead of setting a goal to get promoted within 2 years, you might set a goal to develop specific skills and consistently do excellent work. Instead of setting a goal to find the perfect romantic partner, you might set a goal to become the kind of person I'd want to be in a relationship with. You can plan for the future while staying grounded in present moment awareness. You can work toward long-term objectives while finding satisfaction in daily activities. You can have aspirations while accepting that many factors affecting their fulfillment are beyond your control. How do I deal with setbacks and disappointments? When you don't get something you wanted, or when something you valued is lost, it's natural to feel disappointed. The Stoic approach doesn't eliminate these feelings, but it prevents them from becoming overwhelming or long-lasting. When faced with setbacks, practice asking yourself, what can I learn from this experience? How can this disappointment help me grow or develop character? What opportunities might this create that wouldn't have been available if I had gotten what I originally wanted? How can I use this experience to practice resilience and acceptance? Remember that setbacks are often redirections rather than failures. Sometimes not getting what you want leads you towards something better that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Sometimes disappointment teaches you something important about yourself or your priorities that you needed to learn. Use difficult experiences as opportunities to practice the principles you're learning. When life doesn't go according to your plans, that's exactly when these practices are most valuable and most needed. Anyone can be philosophical when everything is going well. Character is developed by how you respond when things go wrong. How do I maintain these practices when I'm surrounded by a culture that encourages desire? This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of applying Stoic principles in contemporary life. You're constantly bombarded with messages designed to make you want things, to feel dissatisfied with what you have, to believe that happiness comes from external achievements and possessions. The key is to understand that this cultural conditioning is not accidental or neutral. Enormous amounts of money and psychological research go into figuring out how to make you want things. Recognizing that you're deliberately being manipulated can help you resist these influences more effectively. Limit your exposure to advertising and marketing when possible. Be selective about what media you consume. Choose entertainment, news sources, and social connections that support your values rather than undermine them. Surround yourself with people who appreciate what they have, rather than constantly wanting more. Create regular practices that reinforce the principles you're trying to live by. Read philosophy, meditate, practice gratitude, spend time in nature, engage in meaningful conversations. These activities can serve as antidotes to the cultural messages you're exposed to throughout the day. What about ambition and the desire to make a positive impact? There's an important distinction between healthy ambition based on values and service and problematic ambition based on ego and personal gratification. You can want to make a positive impact on the world without being attached to seeing specific results from your efforts. The most effective people often care deeply about their work and its impact, while remaining emotionally detached from whether they receive recognition for their contributions. They're motivated by the intrinsic value of the work itself, rather than by what the work might get them. You can be ambitious about expressing your values, developing your capabilities, and serving others while remaining non-attached to specific measures of success or recognition. You can work to solve important problems while accepting that the problems might not be solved in your lifetime or that you might not get credit for your contributions. How do I balance acceptance with the desire for justice and social change? This is a particularly important question for people who care about social and political issues. The Stoic approach doesn't mean becoming passive in the face of injustice or accepting harmful conditions that could be changed. You can work for justice and positive change while understanding that you can't control the outcome of your efforts. You can be outraged by unfairness while not letting that outrage consume your inner peace or distort your judgment. You can care deeply about social issues while understanding that your emotional well-being can't depend on social progress happening at the pace you'd prefer. Focus on what you can actually influence, your own choices, your own behavior, your own contributions to the causes you care about. Vote, volunteer, donate, educate yourself, engage in constructive dialogue, support good policies and candidates. But don't make your peace of mind dependent on political outcomes or social changes that don't entirely depend on your individual efforts. What about the desire to help others who are suffering? The desire to alleviate suffering and help others is generally considered one of the most noble and worthwhile desires. From a Stoic perspective, this desire is aligned with virtue and the common good, so it's not problematic in the same way that self-centered desires are. However, even the desire to help others can become a source of suffering if you become attached to specific outcomes, or if you make your emotional well-being dependent on your ability to solve other people's problems. You can care deeply about others' well-being while accepting that you can't control whether they accept your help or whether your efforts are successful. Focus on offering help skillfully and compassionately while understanding that each person ultimately has to make their own choices and live their own life. You can provide support, resources, advice, and encouragement, but you can't force anyone to change or heal. Do your best to help while accepting that the results don't entirely depend on you. Now, let's explore some advanced practices and philosophical insights for people who want to go deeper into understanding and working with desire. The practice of memento mori, or remembering death, is one of the most powerful ways to put desire into proper perspective. Regularly contemplating the fact that your life is limited in time helps you appreciate what you have while you have it, and reduces the urgency and intensity of most desires. When you remember that you won't live forever, that everyone you love will eventually die, that all your possessions will eventually belong to someone else, that all your achievements will eventually be forgotten, it becomes much easier to appreciate the present moment, and much harder to get caught up in desperate striving for things that ultimately don't matter. This isn't morbid or depressing when approached correctly. It's liberating. When you accept the temporary nature of everything, you can enjoy it more fully while you have it, without being anxious about losing it. You can appreciate beauty, love, and meaningful experiences without needing to possess them permanently. The practice of spiritual exercise or philosophical training involves treating daily life as an opportunity to practice wisdom and virtue. Every interaction, every challenge, every decision becomes a chance to apply the principles you're learning and to develop your character. When someone cuts you off in traffic, it's an opportunity to practice patience and non-reactivity. When you don't get something you wanted, it's an opportunity to practice acceptance and resilience. When you're tempted to buy something you don't need, it's an opportunity to practice contentment and self-discipline. This approach transforms ordinary experiences into spiritual practice. Instead of seeing life's challenges as obstacles or annoyances, you see them as training opportunities. Instead of trying to avoid difficulty, you welcome it as a chance to grow stronger and wiser. The practice of philosophical contemplation involves regularly reflecting on fundamental questions about life, meaning, and values. What does it mean to live well? What really matters in the grand scheme of things? How do you want to be remembered? What kind of person do you want to become? These contemplations help you maintain perspective on your desires and priorities. When you regularly think about the big picture, it becomes much easier to see that most of the things you want are relatively unimportant compared to developing good character and contributing to the common good. The study of impermanence involves deeply understanding that everything in life is constantly changing and that attachment to keeping things the same is a source of suffering. Your body is aging and will eventually die. Your relationships will change and eventually end. Your possessions will wear out or be lost. Your achievements will be forgotten. Your problems will be resolved or become irrelevant. When you truly understand impermanence, you stop trying to make temporary things permanent. You appreciate beautiful moments without trying to make them last forever. You enjoy pleasant experiences without being anxious about when they'll end. You accept difficult experiences knowing that they too will pass. The cultivation of equanimity involves developing emotional stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless or indifferent. It means having emotional responses that are proportionate to situations and that don't overwhelm your capacity for wise action. When good things happen, you can feel happy without becoming attached to maintaining those good feelings. When bad things happen, you can feel sad or disappointed without becoming overwhelmed or losing perspective. Your emotions become information about what's happening rather than commands that determine your behavior. The practice of sympathia or cosmic connection involves understanding that you're part of a larger whole and that your individual desires and concerns are small parts of a much bigger picture. You're not separate from nature or from other people. You're part of an interconnected system where what affects one part affects the whole. This perspective helps reduce the self-centeredness that fuels much desire-based suffering. When you see yourself as part of something larger, your individual wants and needs become less urgent and overwhelming. You start to care more about the common good and less about getting what you personally want. The development of Sophia or wisdom involves not just understanding these principles intellectually, but embodying them in your daily life. Wisdom means knowing how to apply philosophical insights to practical situations, how to respond skillfully to challenges, how to make good decisions under pressure. Wisdom develops slowly through consistent practice and reflection. It comes from making mistakes, learning from them, and gradually developing better judgment. It requires patience with yourself as you learn to change deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and reacting. The cultivation of ataraxia or tranquility involves developing inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. This is the ultimate goal of Stoic practice, a state of emotional equilibrium where you can remain calm and clear-headed regardless of what's happening around you. This doesn't mean becoming passive or uninvolved. It means having a foundation of inner stability that allows you to engage fully with life without being overwhelmed by its ups and downs. You can care deeply about things while not being anxious about outcomes. You can work hard toward goals while remaining peaceful about results. Now, let's examine how these principles apply to some of the most challenging aspects of modern life. Technology and digital desire represent new forms of wanting that previous generations never had to deal with. Social media platforms are designed to trigger desires for attention, validation, and comparison. Online shopping makes it easier than ever to act on impulses to buy things. Dating apps turn human connection into a consumer experience where you're always looking for someone better. The key to working with digital desire is to use technology consciously rather than compulsively. Before checking social media, ask yourself why you're doing it and what you hope to get from it. Before making online purchases, practice pausing and asking whether you actually need what you're buying or whether you're just responding to marketing manipulation. Set boundaries around technology use. Have times and places where you're completely offline. Notice how you feel when you're constantly connected versus when you take breaks from digital stimulation. Many people discover that they're much more content and present when they're not constantly exposed to other people's highlight reels and marketing messages. Economic uncertainty and financial desire create enormous stress for many people in our unstable economic environment. The fear of not having enough money can drive people to make choices that compromise their values or sacrifice their well-being in pursuit of financial security. The Stoic approach to money involves understanding that financial security is partly within your control and partly outside your control. You can control your spending, your saving, your work ethic, and your financial education. You can't control economic conditions, market fluctuations, or many of the factors that affect your income and financial situation. Focus on what you can control. Living below your means, developing valuable skills, building good relationships, maintaining your health, and making wise financial decisions. Accept that you can't guarantee financial security and that many factors affecting your financial situation are beyond your influence. Find sources of security and satisfaction that don't depend on money. Meaningful relationships, personal interests, opportunities to contribute, moments of beauty and connection. Many of the things that make life most worthwhile are available regardless of your financial situation. Climate change and environmental concerns create a particular form of desire-based suffering for people who care about the future of the planet. The desire for environmental problems to be solved quickly, for other people to change their behavior, for governments and corporations to take action, can create enormous anxiety and despair. Apply the same principles here that apply to other areas of desire. Focus on what you can control, your own environmental choices, your education about environmental issues, your support for good policies and practices, your contributions to environmental causes. Accept that you can't control what other people do or how quickly global problems are addressed. Work for positive environmental change while understanding that you might not see the results of your efforts in your lifetime. Find meaning in doing what you believe is right, regardless of whether it leads to the outcomes you hope for. Focus on being part of the solution rather than being paralyzed by the magnitude of the problems. Global political polarization and social divisions create desires for other people to think differently, for social problems to be resolved, for justice to prevail, for unity and cooperation to replace conflict and division. These are worthy desires, but making your emotional well-being dependent on political outcomes that you can't control creates enormous suffering. Engage in political and social issues in ways that align with your values, while accepting that you can't control how these issues are resolved. Vote, volunteer, donate, educate yourself, engage in constructive dialogue, support good candidates and causes. But don't make your peace of mind dependent on political outcomes or social changes that don't entirely depend on your individual efforts. Focus on treating the people in your immediate life with kindness and respect, rather than being consumed by anger about how people treat each other in distant places or abstract contexts. Practice the changes you want to see in the world, rather than demanding that other people change first. Information overload and the desire to stay informed create their own forms of suffering in our hyper-connected world. The constant stream of news, updates, notifications, and information can create anxiety, overwhelm, and the feeling that you need to know about everything that's happening everywhere all the time. Practice information hygiene. Be selective about what news and media you consume. Choose sources that inform rather than inflame. Set boundaries around news consumption and information checking. Notice how you feel when you're constantly consuming information versus when you take breaks from it. Accept that you can't and don't need to know about everything that's happening in the world. Focus on information that's actually relevant to your life and decisions rather than consuming information for entertainment or out of compulsive habits. The desire for certainty and control in an uncertain world creates enormous suffering for people who want to know what's going to happen, plan for all possibilities, and have guarantees about the future. But uncertainty is a fundamental aspect of existence that can't be eliminated no matter how much you plan or worry. Practice accepting uncertainty as a natural part of life rather than as a problem to be solved. Make good decisions with the information you have while accepting that you can't predict or control all outcomes. Focus on being prepared to respond well to whatever happens rather than trying to prevent all possible problems. Find security in your capacity to adapt and respond rather than in your ability to control circumstances. Develop resilience, flexibility, and inner resources that will serve you regardless of what external challenges you face. As we near the end of this exploration, it's important to understand that working with desire skillfully is not a destination you reach, but a practice you engage in throughout your life. These insights and techniques require consistent application and patience with yourself, as you learn to change deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and reacting. The goal is not to eliminate all desires or to become emotionless. The goal is to develop wisdom about which desires serve your well-being and which ones create suffering, to learn to pursue what you value without being enslaved by the need to get it, to find contentment that doesn't depend on external circumstances while remaining engaged with life and committed to growth and contribution. This is perhaps the most radical insight in all of philosophy, that happiness, peace, and fulfillment are available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances. Not because your circumstances are perfect, but because true well-being comes from internal sources that you can develop and maintain regardless of what's happening around you. The suffering that most people experience is not caused by their circumstances, but by their relationship to their circumstances. It's not caused by what they lack, but by their attachment to getting what they lack. It's not caused by external events, but by their resistance to external events and their insistence that life should be different than it is. When you understand this deeply, when you really see how desire operates in your own life and how it creates the very suffering it promises to resolve, you realize that you have much more control over your happiness than you thought. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you relate to what happens to you. You can't control whether you get what you want, but you can control whether your happiness depends on getting what you want. You can't control external circumstances, but you can control your internal response to external circumstances. You can't eliminate all problems from your life, but you can eliminate the additional suffering you create by demanding that your problems not exist. This understanding leads to a profound shift in how you relate to your entire life. Instead of constantly trying to rearrange external circumstances to make yourself happy, you focus on developing internal capacities that allow you to be happy regardless of circumstances. Instead of making your well-being dependent on other people's behavior, external achievements, or favorable conditions, you find sources of contentment and meaning that you can access regardless of what's happening around you. Instead of constantly reaching for something more, something different, something better, you learn to appreciate what's already present, what's already good, what's already enough. This doesn't mean giving up on goals, relationships, or positive change. It means pursuing these things from a place of choice rather than desperation, appreciation rather than need, service rather than self-interest. When you're not enslaved by desire, you can engage more fully and effectively with all aspects of life. You can love without possessing, care without controlling, achieve without being anxious, fail without being devastated, succeed without being arrogant. You can be present for beauty without needing to possess it, present for connection without needing to control it, present for meaning without needing to manufacture it. You can face uncertainty without being overwhelmed, face setbacks without being defeated, face loss without being destroyed. You can find peace in the midst of difficulty, contentment in the midst of imperfection, and meaning in the midst of mortality. This is the great liberation that Stoic philosophy offers. Freedom from the tyranny of desire. Freedom to engage fully with life without being enslaved by it. Freedom to find happiness and peace, regardless of what the external world provides or withholds. It's not an easy path, and it requires consistent practice, patience with yourself, and the willingness to question some of the most basic assumptions of our culture about what creates happiness and success. But it's the most reliable path to lasting well-being that humans have ever discovered. The alternative is to remain enslaved by desire, to keep believing that happiness is just one more achievement away, to keep chasing external solutions to internal problems, to keep making your peace of mind dependent on variables you can't control, to keep suffering from the very mechanism that promises to end your suffering. But why would you choose that path when there's another way available? Why would you keep suffering from desire when you could learn to work with desire wisely? Why would you keep making your happiness conditional on getting what you want when you could find happiness in appreciating what you already have? The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know that there is a choice. You know that suffering is not inevitable, that happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances, that peace is possible regardless of what you have or don't have, achieve or don't achieve, gain or lose. The wisdom is here. The practices are available. The freedom is waiting. The only question is whether you're ready to claim it. Thank you.